Welcome to the 6th SkelForm tutorial, where we will be going over PSD importing. We will be using the Chibington PSD file for this video. Throughout this tutorial series, we've been slowly creating Chibington directly from within SkelForm. So what we did was we imported the textures manually, we created all of the bones manually, and we did all of this setup directly within. However, there is another way that you can create armatures, which is outside of SkelForm. In my case, I am using Krita, but you can use other programs like GIMP or Photoshop that can also export with PSD. PSD meaning a Photoshop document file. Using a program like this, which is normally where you create the textures in the first place or where you draw your armature, you can automatically import a file like that directly within SkelForm, which is actually how I started making Chibington in the first place. So just to show you how it works, if we were to press import and if we were to select our PSD, we will first be asked if we would like to replace the armature, and we will get back to this later. But let's just select yes for now, and we'll see that automatically the base of the Chibington character has already been created. Now you'll see that he is missing one arm and he is also missing one leg, but I will show later why it's done like this. But regardless, you can see that there's already a structure going on. You can see that the correct textures are somewhat being used. For example, for the skull, it is using the skull texture correctly. For the left eye, it's using the correct one. Right eye is also using the correct one. For example, left arm is also using them. So we can automatically create a sort of template for the armature from the PSD, and then we can work from here. So you don't have to create all of it from scratch. It's automatically given to you. For example, if you look at the textures have also been properly imported. This is actually how I imported the textures originally for the tutorials. Let's go over how exactly the PSD is formed. Because when you are trying to create an armature from PSDs, you need to keep in mind that there is a certain structure that you need. So for example, in order to create one bone, each bone is basically a group within a PSD. So for example, let's say that we have this neck group, which will have another layer, which is another bone. So that will be the child in this case. But we also have two layers here. Now, usually the way that I draw is I will have the outline on one layer and then I will have the colors on another layer. But you'll see that even though these are two layers, when we actually go to the editor and if we see what it's imported, we'll see that the neck is actually still one texture. It correctly assumed that both the neck outline and the neck color would just be one texture, and that's because the way that the importing works is that any layer within a group will be combined into one texture for that bone. So for example, for the skull or for the head, we'll see that there are two eye groups. There are other groups for the hat and for the closed versions of the eyes, but there's also the skull outline and the skull colors. So these two layers will be associated with this skull group, and so when it's imported, it will now use that skull group's name and combine the two layers that were inside of it. And this works for any amount of layers. Even if you had only one layer, if you had 3 layers, 5 layers, 50 layers, it will always combine all of them into one texture for that particular bone. If we look at certain layers or groups, for example, for the left leg, we'll see that beyond just the usual layers and the usual groups, we'll also see layers that start with a $sign pivot, or also groups. So in this case, for example, we'll see a black dot that starts with a $sign and then pivot, and then there will be a group here called $sign and then the name. This one, in this case, is the style. So if you have a group that starts with a $sign, speech marks, and then the name inside of it, then it will automatically create a style with that name. So in this case, since it's called SkelForm Pants, SkelForm will automatically import the textures inside, and it will automatically put them in a style called Skeleton Pants, where you'll see the left leg and the left foot and the left leg. So if we were to look at the PSD, we'll also see that there are these two. And then if we were to go to the left foot, we'll see that there's yet another group called Skeleton Pants, which will also have the skeleton version of the pants. And so within SkelForm, it will automatically recognize that and then put them where they belong. And just to show you the other two styles, if we go to the torso group, we'll see that there's a $ skeleton coat with the skeleton coat layers. And then for the hat as well, there'll be a skeleton hat, which of course will also have the hat's layers. And this is how styles can also be directly imported. And as for the pivot layer, the way that this works is if you have a layer that's called exactly this, then when SkelForm imports the PSD, it will automatically assign the texture pivot based on where you put it. So for example, if we were to take the left leg and if we were to just move it here for clarity's sake, if we were to check out where the actual pivot is, we'll see that it's this black dot. So if I put this black dot exactly here where you would expect the pivot to be, and if I were to put it back, then the next time that you import the armature, you will see that on the exactly where you put the pivot, SkelForm will automatically adjust the texture to be where it's supposed to be. So for example, here you'll see that the pivot position is actually different because this is where the black dot initially was. So we can actually automatically rotate this as if it were a leg. And this also applies to the foot as well, because if we were to check the left foot group, we will see that there is also another layer exactly called a $ pivot. PSDs are also capable of storing inverse kinematics data. So if we were to look at the left leg, for example, we'll see that none of the groups have any inverse kinematics related data. But what we can do is create a new layer, and we will call this $IK underscore. And for this one, we will use the family index. So in this case, since this is the only one for now, we'll call it 0. And we can copy this exact layer for all of the other parts. So we started with the left leg, and now we can copy that one for the left foot as well, and then again for the left shoe. So now, if we were to import this into the editor, each of these bones individually will be automatically assigned to the first inverse kinematics family index. So if we were to now drag the newly updated PSD, and if we were to press yes, we will see that now there's going to be a special new bone called a left leg target. And if we were to move it around, you'll see that automatically the leg does actually follow because it has the inverse kinematics data properly imported. We'll see that the 0th family index, which we assigned from the PSD, has now been properly assigned. But there is still an issue. If we were to move it up, we'll see that there is still an issue with the constraint, because the constraint hasn't been set to anything yet. We need to set it to clockwise for this leg, but we can also do that directly from the PSD. So let's go to the left leg again, and let's create a new layer, and we will call this IK underscore, and now we will use the name of the constraint that we want to use. So it's either clockwise or counterclockwise. In our case, we want it to be clockwise. So if we were to do that, and if we were to now save the PSD and then import it again, so in this case, import it here. Yes. You can also load PSDs by dragging, by the way. You don't have to always click the import button. But if we were to now check this out, we will see that it now does respect the constraint because it has been already set from the PSD. We'll see here that now it's clockwise. Now, keep in mind that when you are trying to set the constraint, you need to do it from the first bone of the family index, just like you would do it from within the editor. For example, you cannot change the constraint from within the left foot or from within the shoe. You need to do it starting from the left leg, since that's where the first inverse kinematics bone starts for this family. And the same thing applies to the PSD. One thing I would like to point out is that there's only one arm and one leg within the PSD. And the reason for this is because for Chibington in particular, I don't really want to have two sets of unique textures for all 4 limbs. I just want to have one set of textures for the arms and one set of textures for the legs. Of course, if you're creating a character where you need to have unique textures, you can go ahead and create them. But since I don't want to bloat the texture list with more textures than what's actually needed, it's better to just make one set and then just import the PSD like that, and then add the other arm and the other leg separately from within the editor. So we've covered everything that PSDs have to offer. But there is one more thing that I would like to go through, which is it's a small detail, but it's very important. So if we were to drag the PSD again, and if we were to import it, I mentioned before that we can just keep pressing yes on this model and just proceed like usual. But let's take a moment to think about why exactly this was created in the first place. So here, what happens is when you import a PSD, the first thing that happens is that the textures are automatically replaced for you. However, it asks you if you would like to replace the armature as well, because normally the way that the workflow would work is, let's say that you create the PSD, you import it to create the template armature or the base armature, and from there you continue editing the armature. So for example, in my case, let's say that I now want to edit this armature directly through the editor. So for example, I'm setting up the inverse kinematics for the arms, right? I set it up like this. I now have it working. Well, let's assume that I have it working for now. We can fix it later. But let's say that I have something like this. Now, let's say that from within the PSD, I would like to make a change. So for example, for the arm, maybe there's a mistake that I made in the texture, or maybe I would like to add a new style, or maybe I just want to change it in its entirety. So for example, let's say that I were to change this layer and I were to, for example, just add something weird, like maybe just scribble it around. Now let's say that I now want to apply this edit into the armature itself from within SkelForm. So the way that I would do it is, first of all, I would save. I would then import it from here. However, this is where this model becomes very important, because I've imported the PSD and the texture has been updated, as you can see from behind the model. However, I don't want the PSD to also replace the armature that I've just edited, because I still have the inverse kinematics information for the arm that I've edited manually. So if I were to replace the armature now, I'm going to lose that data and I'm going to have to start all over again. I only wanted to replace the textures. So in this case, it would actually be better for you to press no and continue working from where you left off, just with updated textures in any case where that's necessary. So now I have the new texture and I can continue making any edits that I want. And the next time, if I want to edit the PSD and if I want to edit any of the textures, I don't have to worry about SkelForm automatically editing the armature and losing all of my progress. I can just only import the textures and keep the armature as it is.
That'll be all for this tutorial.
We've covered everything that PSDs have to offer, such as the basic structure, using pivots, having styles, and inverse kinematics data. This is the final tutorial for the series. Here's a quick recap of everything that we've learned so far. Now that you've learned everything that SkelForm has to offer, go out there and create the best character that you can. See you next time in another video.